All right. So, today's topic is Iran in a quagmire. And, just to give you a little bit of a backdrop, uh, those of you who have been here for a while know that I say very frequently that investors and Wall Street analysts, economists, do a very poor job of geopolitical analysis. And just to give you the most recent example of poor geopolitical analysis, just a day or two before the war broke out, I was listening to an interview with a hedge fund manager by the name of Stan Druckenmiller. Now, to those of us who are steeped in the world of finance, that is a name in the investment world similar to Tiger Woods is to golf, or Michael Jordan to basketball. But Stan Druckenmiller, because you don't need to be in great physical shape to be an investor. Stan Druckenmiller is probably in his early 70s, and he's still at the top of his game, still a tremendous, tremendous investor. And again, he is in modern times, he is the guy. There's no one on Wall Street who isn't in awe of the skills and performance of Stan Druckenmiller. So anyway, I bring this up because he was, as I said, he was being interviewed a day or two before the war broke out, and I know Stan a little bit, and he is incredibly genuine. He would never mislead his audience. If he tells you he's invested in something, he's truly invested in something, um, and he's not looking to get people to invest in what he's invested in so he can sell it to others to get out of his positions. He's a genuine, honest, good person. So anyway, his big positions that he talked about that he really wanted to highlight, he said he was long the South Korean stock market, meaning he was a big owner of South Korean stocks. He was very long Japanese stocks, and he was very short the US dollar. And I was absolutely struck by his positions because it was clear to me that if a war broke out, which in all likelihood was going to happen in the coming days or coming weeks, these positions were going to be the ones that got hit the hardest. He would get destroyed if a war broke out. So it was clear to me that he wasn't appreciating how near we were to war breaking out. Astonishing. And I immediately sent a message to one of my buddies who is also a global macro hedge fund manager. And this guy happens to be very focused on currencies. And I said to him, "Can you believe that Stan is short the dollar? He's going to get run over." And my friend really didn't have much to say about it, and he sort of gave me some of the economic arguments that why it might make sense to be short the dollar. And I said to my friend, "You're missing the point. The dollar is going to rip. It's going to rally, and because a war is breaking out. I don't know if it's today, tomorrow, a week, 2 weeks, but it is coming." Anyway, my friend didn't take my geopolitical analysis. These guys are not steeped in geopolitics. And of course, the war broke out. The South Korean stock market dropped by 20% in just the few days of this week. Monday through that it gives us 2 days, Monday and Tuesday. The South Korean market was down 20%. The Japanese stock market was down 10%. And the dollar ripped against every single currency in the world. So Stan must have gotten run over. But the reason I bring it up is not to highlight, poor Stan, and not poor Stan because Stan is a multi-billionaire, but just to highlight the fact that how poor Wall Street and the biggest and best investors do not do proper geopolitical analysis. And here we go again. We see the conventional wisdom on this war is that it is a quagmire. It is chaos. It's a mess. And I really want to delve into actually what is going on to help us synthesize what is going on and understand it and approach this from a logical perspective and shed some light. So, how is the war progressing? Well, as I said, the media and the investor world seems to think that it's a quagmire. After all, the U.S. embassy in Saudi Arabia was hit a few days ago. There was a United States-owned building in Kuwait that was struck as well. Rockets are being fired at Israel at a daily basis. Also, Qatar has been hit. Jordan has been hit. United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Oman, Iraq, Cyprus. They've all been struck by Iranian missiles with very, very light damage, I might add. And I already mentioned to that list, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait have been hit. So investors and the media have this vision of a war that has engulfed the region, the entire Middle East, and everything is on fire. And of course, we've seen big concerns about the Straits of Hormuz, which is a key channel for shipment, especially of oil. And we saw oil prices, skyrocket, not skyrocket, but go up pretty significantly on Monday and Tuesday of this week. And they, of course, had been edging up last week as well. So these are real concerns. I don't want to just pour cold water and say, everyone's being super foolish. These are valid worries, which we'll soon address. But on top of the valid concerns, you also have a tremendous amount of political bias that is clouding people's analytical lens. So first, I want to discuss a little bit the political bias. So critics of the war on both the left and the right question whether there was, in fact, an imminent threat from Iran. Now, I understand that an imminent threat, for example, Iran having nuclear weapons or perhaps having the ability to hit the United States and Europe with nuclear-headed intercontinental ballistic missiles, if that were in fact a real risk, like right now, that would provide a more satisfying justification for action. In many people's minds, that would satisfy them saying, okay, yes, Iran does present an imminent threat. But the question of whether there was an imminent threat suggests that threats should be allowed to become highly advanced before they can be addressed, before they can be stopped. So, but let's be clear. Once a threat becomes highly advanced, then it becomes nearly impossible to address the threat. Just to make it really clear, let's look at China. China was allowed over the years to develop a massive, powerful military with tremendous, tremendous firepower that can do terrible, terrible, terrible damage to the United States. So if China were to invade Japan, right, and we know Taiwan is actually of great strategic value to the United States, what would happen? What would the United States do? It's a real conundrum. We do not know what the United States would do because a war with China would have disastrous consequences for the United States and for the world. So China does represent an imminent threat. But there's nothing we can do about it because we waited far too long to be able to stop China, right? China. So the question is, do we want Iran to become like China? And if Iran became like China, we see what Iran has done. They do invade other countries, right? They use their terror network to to invade Israel. And they wouldn't stop there, right? If they were permitted, they would keep going. So do you want to wait for Iran to weaponize themselves to the extent that they become too dangerous to stop? So imminent threat. If we wait for Iran to become an imminent threat, then it's far too late to stop them. A second point that is important to understand, and it's related to the critics of the war, and we're right now continuing to deal with the politicization of the analysis. How did we get to this point where we had no choice really but to go to war with Iran? What got us here? Well, it really dates back to the Obama administration. The Obama administration negotiated with Iran a nuclear agreement. And in that deal, the Obama administration allowed Iran to enrich its uranium. And by enriching its uranium, it took it right to the nuclear threshold, which is where we were in June of last year. Now, as part of that deal, aside from giving Iran the right to enrich uranium, Obama also gave Iran $1.7 billion. Now, that massive amount of cash enabled Iran to fund a vast and lethal terrorist network and build a ballistic missile system and a nuclear program. Okay, so the very reason why Iran became the dangerous power that it became is directly attributable to that deal that Obama did with the Iranians. Then when we skip over the Trump presidency and we move to the Biden presidency, Biden unfroze $16 billion worth of assets that Iran had access to. And that huge stockpile of cash continued to feed this oppressive regime and enabled them to even bolster their terrorist networks, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, and a global terrorist network as well was extremely well funded, well equipped with weaponry. And in doing so, the Obama and Biden administrations basically enabled one of the greatest human rights violators of modern times, right? Iran is one of the greatest human rights violators of modern times. They are oppressive to women. You know, all the groups that the left claims to rally behind, they're deeply oppressive to women. They murder people who are gay. They allow little girls get married at obscene young ages. In fact, not they allow, they force little girls to get married at shockingly young ages. This is essentially raping of children. So when people say today that Iran is not our business and they are not an imminent threat, do we really want to go down this path again? Okay. So let's say you make the argument, fine, we won't make the mistake that Obama made and Biden made of enabling the regime and giving them financing, enabling them to get weapons. But that doesn't mean we have to go to war. So let's answer that question. We could have just maintained tight sanctions on them, right? Cut off their financing. Wouldn't that have been effective? Sounds reasonable. Well, it's important to note that Iran has become a forward military base for China. And China has become Iran's lifeline. So it used to be that Obama and Biden were Iran's lifeline. But now China is Iran's lifeline. China provides Iran with huge amounts of financing as well as weapons. In 2021, China and Iran signed a cooperation agreement. And the agreement was that Iran would supply cheap oil to China. And in exchange for that cheap oil, China would in turn help Iran to build and maintain and enhance its vast military infrastructure. So China supplies Iran with missiles and drones and air defense systems. In fact, Iran was just due to receive what's known as a supersonic anti-ship cruise missile. Not just one, but many. These supersonic anti-ship cruise missiles can travel 200 miles. They have a 200-mile range, and they are designed to evade ship defense systems of U.S. carrier strike groups. So shortly, Iran would have had these supersonic anti-ship cruise missiles. And once they had those missiles, once Iran had those missiles in their hands, they become extremely dangerous to the strike groups that we now have in the region. So again, once those missiles were in their hands, there'd be very little we could do or might be willing to do to stop Iran, because if Iran could sink our most dangerous boats, we might be far more reluctant to send them into the waters close to Iran. Not only that, China now has been providing Iran with a cyber shield to prevent the United States and Israel from hacking all the defense systems that Iran has and their communication systems. So that raises the question. So now we've sort of established the fact that Iran is a front base for China. Why is China so interested in Iran? Well, there's really two reasons. Number one, China requires a lot of oil from the rest of the world to run its economy. It's a huge economy. They produce a lot of oil, but their oil needs are so vast that China can't satisfy all of its oil needs internally, so they need to export a lot of oil. And a lot of that oil comes from Iran. As I said, Iran, as part of that cooperation agreement, supplies almost all of Iran's exports go to China. So 15% of China's oil imports, we said it has to import a lot of oil, 15% of those oil imports come from Iran. And that is very significant. The other country that supplied a significant portion of Iran's oil was Venezuela. Interesting. So this oil from Iran and Venezuela is not so easily replaced because it's incredibly cheap. It's incredibly cheap. So that's one reason why China is interested in Iran. A second reason is Iran is a massive thorn in the side of the United States. Iran takes up a lot of time from the United States and a lot of resources of the United States. And this time and resources might be better spent rather than the U.S. focusing on Iranian threats and Iranian nuclear capabilities and Iranian intercontinental ballistic missiles. It would be more useful for the United States to spend time focusing on deterring China. But because Iran is such a menace and creating all these proxy wars, it's been a very useful way of distracting the United States and wearing down U.S. military resources, right? Draining our resources on Iran rather than China. So this has been very helpful to China, and it allows China to expand globally as we are distracted. So our war on Iran is actually beginning to strangle China. Why is that? Well, just think about it. First, we took out Maduro from Venezuela, and we essentially have redirected Venezuela's oil exports away from China towards the United States. So we deprived China of one of its key oil resources. Now we're in the process of doing the same with Iran. So it's weakening China's access to cheap oil. Furthermore, Venezuela was a key anti-American proxy. Iran is even a more important key anti-American proxy. Venezuela is no longer one of those anti-American proxies, and Iran is well on its way to no longer being an anti-American proxy. And they will not be able to distract U.S. attention and suck U.S. resources away from focusing on China in the future. So this is very important. Furthermore, and this is extremely important, we, the United States, are sending a clear message to China's so-called friends in the world, to China's allies in the world. So what happened when the United States removed Venezuela? Did China do anything about it? Did Russia, another ally of Venezuela, do anything about it? They did nothing. They watched. And as we are striking Iran, what's China doing? What's Russia doing? They're watching. They're just watching. So this is a very important signal that is being sent to the world. Why would you want to be an ally of China or Russia? I'm throwing Russia in there as well. Wouldn't you rather be a close ally of the United States who stands by its friends? Now, this sets the stage for an important meeting that is scheduled in April between President Trump and the Chinese leader Xi Jinping. So coming into this meeting, who has the leverage? Trump clearly has the leverage. He is showing China, he's showing the world that the United States is not afraid to use its military muscle. So let's just review what we've just learned. Number one, China's energy lifelines, its cheap energy lifelines, are being cut off. And we're telling China they are not untouchable. Be careful. Number two, we're letting China's allies know your partnership with China, your strategic partnerships with China, they're empty. China will not stand by you, just like they didn't stand by Venezuela, just like they didn't stand by Iran. Right? When it gets tough, when it really comes down to it, China may supply you with weapons, they may supply you with all types of equipment, with money, but when it really comes down to it, they will not stand by you. That's a very powerful message. Thirdly, the United States has demonstrated that the United States still has the will to act militarily. For years, China and others have thought that the United States didn't have the stomach, the toughness to act. The thinking was we would not use our hard power, our military power. The Chinese, the Iranians, the Russians, they've always assumed that since the Iraq war, we've become soft. We've become too risk averse. But now we are showing our enemies and our friends that we are willing to reshape the board geopolitically when our interests are in danger. And it reminds the world that the United States has enormous power and we will use it if tested. So yes, going into this meeting between Trump and Xi, Trump certainly has a big upper hand. So have you heard this anywhere, this type of analysis? No. No. And if you heard this in the media, if you heard analysts telling this is the story of why it's imperative that the U.S. take action, it would answer a lot of questions. But with all the political biases blinding people, right, the truth gets completely drowned out. Okay. So why is it that we should ignore Iran and pretend that it's not our business? and this war is not absolutely in the national interest of the United States. So I've heard absolutely not one coherent argument why this Iranian regime should not be put to an end, right? Should not be ended. All right, now let's move on to the war itself and let's try to understand what's going on. Well, to start, if you were a Israeli or US military strategist, if you were, a general in the United States military or in the Israeli military, the big concern was, would the United States and Israel be able to surprise Iran again? Right? We surprised them during the 12-day war. Will we be able to surprise them again? And why is surprise so important? Surprise is key because some of the biggest and most consequential strikes are made at the outset of a war. To gain a major strategic advantage in the first minutes of war, that is an enormous, enormous advantage, and it can tilt the scales of war very quickly. So it's hard to surprise twice in a row. But somehow the US and Israel pulled it off. Well, Israel took the lead. The first attack happened on Saturday morning at 8:10 a.m. Israel time, which was 1:10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Israel launched a highly precise attack on two main sites where leaders were convening. And in that strike, 40 top leaders of Iran were removed in one attack, including the leader of Iran. Very quickly, Israel launched 1,200 attacks, and the US also launched 1,200 attacks, right? And the very first person eliminated was the supreme leader, Khamenei. And the thinking was, if we didn't take out Khamenei immediately, he would go into hiding and it would be much, much more difficult to get him. So that was absolutely key. Well, the question is, why strike at this moment? Now, just to review, the attack was actually supposed to start Saturday night. Typically, these attacks begin at nighttime. But an audible was called because an opportunity was created by this gathering of these 40 leaders of Iran, right? Israeli intelligence was able to locate where this gathering was taking place. They got word of the gathering. How they got word, we don't really know. So the attack was moved to daylight. And it's interesting. Why in the world would the Iranians not expect it? And the reason they didn't expect it is because all attacks that Israel has ever done, for sure, they've always begun at night. So this was the first time ever that a daytime attack was launched. And they just didn't have the creativity, the imagination to think that they might get attacked in the daylight. So what's the impact of eliminating Khamenei? Well, it's a big symbol. He is a one-of-a-kind religious leader. He's almost like a messiah of sorts in Iran, right? Among the religious world. So that was an enormous symbol. Secondly, these other 39 religious leaders were also the sort of the heart and soul of the religious part of the Islamist regime. Now, they also, just a day later, killed a former president. His last name is Ahmadinejad, and he was also one of the big names in the Iranian religious circles. So these were massive, important symbolic hits. And it's important to know that going forward, this is an incredibly well-planned, detailed attack plan. The United States and Israel have prepared thousands and thousands of targets. There is a systematic plan how to dismantle and destroy the capabilities of the regime. It's important to point out that this is very different from the 12-day war of last year. Why is it? Why is it so different? Because this time around, both the United States and Israel are fighting side by side, highly coordinated. During the 12-day war, Israel fought almost the entire war, and the United States came in right at the end to drop bombs on Iran's nuclear sites. But this one is vastly different because of the level of coordination and the vastness of the campaign. Why is that? Why is this a totally different campaign? Because the goal is entirely different. Even though, and we'll talk about this a bit later, uh, the stated goal, depending on who you speak to, isn't necessarily regime change. The real goal is certainly regime change. It's not just about eliminating some Iranian sites. It's about eliminating the entire Iranian leadership. It's about destroying centers of government, eliminating their communication networks. It's about destroying the entire IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is the heart and soul of the repressive apparatus of the Iranian regime. It's about destroying the besiege forces, which are the voluntary paramilitary forces loyal to the regime. It's about destroying the Navy. It's about destroying the Air Force. This is a completely comprehensive operation. And that's why it is so massive in size and so different from the 12-day war, which was much more of a targeted campaign. So the United States and Israel have near total control of Iranian airspace. Not total control, but near total control at this point. U.S. and Israeli planes are flying above Iran almost unthreatened. Again, I say almost, not entirely. The United States is attacking with B-1s and B-2s. We are hitting Iran's ballistic missile sites. In fact, the reports are that as of a day ago, and it's probably more than this now, one half of Iran's ballistic missile arsenal has been destroyed, right? It just took a couple of days to do that. So their ballistic missiles have been cut in half from something like 2,000 to 1,000 missiles now. It's probably a bit less than that at this point. They are hitting Iran's ballistic missile launchers. Iran has both static launchers that they're immobile, you can't move them, and they also have mobile launchers, which are more important because they can be shifted, they can be moved around, they can be hidden. So that's the priority right now, striking down those missile launchers, especially the mobile launchers. And once you take out their missile launchers, then it doesn't matter if they still have ballistic missiles because they won't be able to launch them. So the strategic priority right now is those missile launchers. They also have started to go after the ballistic missile storage sites, right? That is, we're still in the early stages of that, but those storage sites. Also, the ballistic missile production chain, so they won't be able to produce ballistic missiles in the future. That is also begun, but it's far from having been completed. We're hitting their command and control centers, the centers of government. So government officials won't be able to meet with each other and communicate with each other. We're dismantling the entire communications infrastructure, right? Again, not nearly complete, but these efforts are underway. Iran's Navy and Air Force are almost entirely destroyed. Not entirely yet, but almost entirely. So the United States and Israel are ensuring that Iran will not have the capacity to hit anything in Iranian skies, to ensure that they won't be able to launch missiles into Israel or any of the other Arab capitals. This should be accomplished fairly soon. Maybe after a week, that goal will be accomplished. And once that's accomplished, Then the United States and Israel will have complete control over Iranian airspace. Now, Iran tried to close the Straits of Hormuz, which is where the oil is shipped. Okay. And it's true that ships are not passing through, but they're not passing through by choice. Iran has not closed the straits, right? It's simply a choice. Why would you want to go through the straits when there's a war going on? But Iran does not have the capacity to close those straits because their entire navy has almost been sunk. It's sitting at the bottom of the sea. Now, the United States and Israel are only releasing partial information. For the most part, it's, small little details. So it may take a couple of more days to really understand the magnitude of the damage that has been inflicted on Iran. But it is quite massive. Now, in response, what has Iran done? Well, Iran has launched missiles into Israel. Uh, Sadly, they killed one civilian in Tel Aviv. They killed 9 civilians in an area in Israel called Beit Shemesh, and 50 others were injured. But so far, that's the extent of the casualties on the Israeli side. We know that there were 3 American soldiers that were killed as well. Um, but this is pretty limited damage. And it's far less than the damage that Iran was able to inflict during the 12-day war at this stage. So the surprise here, if you speak to US and Israeli military commanders, the surprise here is how limited Iran's response has been and how quickly we've been able to degrade Iran and how ill prepared Iran was to be able to resist this war. For that reason, because Iran has been able to inflict such limited damage, uh, the Iranian regime is reacting hysterically, right? They have shot hundreds of ballistic missiles and drones at Arab countries. And the goal, a lot of people say, why would they do that? Why would they do that? Well, the goal was to get these Arab countries to panic and then to call the United States and say, look, you got to stop this war because Iran is attacking us. Well, that's not how it's played out. Iran's strike against Arab countries has completely backfired. And now even the Saudis are calling for regime change. And in fact, the Saudis and the Qataris and other Arab countries have actually joined the war effort. And while this may not be incredibly important from a military standpoint, because the United States and Israel have far more firepower than any of the other Arab countries, and are able to operate that firepower much more skillfully, it is important that the Arabs have joined the war effort from a political standpoint, right? And no one expected that the Arab countries would unite behind the United States and Israel overtly, not keeping it undercover the way they usually do, but saying it out loud that they want this Iranian regime to be destroyed. That is new. And I would say that after the war, it probably increases the chances of the Abraham Accords expanding, and perhaps this will push the Saudis to make a deal with Israel, a real true peace deal and business deals that was looking unlikely before the war. Perhaps the likelihood of that is increasing, which would be a very good outcome after the war if that were to happen. So Iran's attempt to regionalize this war, right, and to get Arab countries to pressure the United States to stop, it's completely failing. Uh, Within Iran, you're starting to hear some small reports that certain members of the IRGC have defected or have expressed interest in defecting or fleeing the country. This is happening to a greater extent in the regular Iranian military. So the IRGC is sort of the elite, deeply loyal to the regime part of the military. Then there's a separate military, which is the traditional military. That's where you're seeing more people looking to leave the country, and actually some have left the country. But it's important to point out that the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, that is very, very loyal to the regime, they are, for the most part, deeply ideological. And many of them, I don't want to say all of them, but many of them will fight to the end. So, therefore, once Iran runs out of missile launching capability, what will the IRGC do? And what will the political and religious part of the regime decide to do? It's likely, once they can't damage the external enemy anymore, they'll turn on the internal enemy being the local population. The IRGC is likely to repress the local population heavily, and probably they'll try to get out in front of any street protests. They'll try to kill as many people as possible so that when people finally do get the call from Donald Trump saying time to take to the streets, they will have already dealt, the IRGC will already have dealt a huge blow to the internal opposition. So we know that Israel specifically has been eliminating the top leadership of the IRGC and the government. But what about the rank and file in the IRGC? Have they been hit? We don't know, right? We don't have any detail about that. But if they haven't, it's and even if they have started, it's going to be vital that the United States and Israel begin to use precision drone strikes to take out the soldiers in the IRGC, to dramatically weaken, the repressive apparatus of the IRGC. And you do that by killing as many of the IRGC as possible, right? You've got to really do severe damage to that repressive apparatus. And not only the IRGC, but the Basij as well. You've got to have the Basij being those voluntary paramilitary forces that are loyal to the regime. They need to be hit very, very hard. So that probably is going to be an important next stage of this war. Now, again, once the offensive capabilities of Iran are completely degraded, you have to ask yourself, well, doesn't Iran have some asymmetric capabilities? What's an asymmetric capability? That refers to, in this case, Iran probably has sleeper cells, certainly in Europe, likely in the United States as well. They may, in their desperation, call on those sleeper cells to rise up. So that's something that's very difficult for the United States to police and to be on top of, but it's something that obviously our authorities need to be aware of. Now, the United States so far has resisted calling Iranians into the streets. Why? Because they don't want to endanger them at this point, right? We said that the IRGC, the repressive apparatus, is still intact. So, as I mentioned, that must be degraded. The IRGC and the Basij's repressive apparatus needs to be dismantled as much as possible. And only then would the Trump administration and Prime Minister, the Israeli Prime Minister, begin to call on the Iranian people to rise up. Now, it's in order to have a regime change, right? First, you need this massive attack from us, United States and Israel, but then you actually do need the Iranian people to rise up. You cannot have regime change with just external strikes on Iran. You need the people. The people have to be the boots on the ground. The United States isn't going to send boots on the ground. Israel's not going to send real boots on the ground. They may to some extent, Israel might to some extent, but not enough to topple the regime. This has to come from the Iranian people. Now, just to back up a minute, the intensity of the strikes by the United States and Israel have been incredible. Now, it's about to ramp up, right? The United States and Israel are about to ramp up these attacks pretty intensely. President Trump has said it. Marco Rubio has said it. Pete Hegseth has said it. He said it just today. They're all saying that a big wave is coming. And the Israelis are saying it as well. So in the coming days, we're going to see a real intensification coming from the United States and Israel. Right now, the Iranian threat that has the most potency actually doesn't come from within Iran. It comes from Lebanon. It comes from Hezbollah. And they still have very powerful weapons. And Israel specifically has recently turned its attention to Iran, to Lebanon and Hezbollah. They have been severely damaged from 2 years of war, but they're still dangerous. So we're seeing now Israel step up that campaign. In fact, my son was called the other day, and he's actually going to be going into Lebanon to join in that effort. Just a personal aside there. Now moving to regime change. We have heard some conflicting comments out of the Trump administration about regime change. I earlier said I do think this is about regime change. Why is it that regime change has become such a bad word? Well, we know it's because of the Iraq war, right? After removing Saddam Hussein, it really did turn into a quagmire, and we didn't successfully bring about a clean regime change. But any successful war does mean regime change, right? What is a regime change? A regime change occurs when a certain country or a certain government has a mission. In this case, the murderous mission of taking over the world, right? Taking over the Middle East, conquering other countries, chanting death to America, death to Israel, having a strategy to murder, to assassinate the American president, right? Iran tried twice to do that. That's on record. We know that's true. People don't like to admit that, but that happens to be a fact. Regime change means getting a government to shift its mission. Almost always, that coincides with new people coming into the government, right? So anytime a war has been successful, the mission of the losing country changes its mission and decides to live in peace with the ones who defeated them, right? So if you don't achieve regime change, you really haven't achieved anything, because if the mission of that government remains the same, they will just rearm and fight and live to fight another day. So regime change is necessary if you truly want this country to change its behavior. And as I said, all successful wars have always meant regime change, right? That's, no one likes to say it, but that's the truth. So Trump himself has said there needs to be a regime change. And we know that both, well, when I say we, people who are really digging into the weeds and trying to understand this war, we know that both the CIA and the Mossad have been sending, and even Trump, by the way, even the Trump administration, has been releasing statements in Persian, letting them know, and I'm going to quote one of these messages that was sent in Persian, translated into English. We will continue with determination on the path toward toppling the regime. The main pillars of repression have been removed, and others in the regime are fleeing in panic. Okay? These messages are being coordinated by the Trump administration, by the Netanyahu administration, by the CIA, by the Mossad, and by Reza Pahlavi, who is the main opposition figure who lives in the United States, who could potentially be a leader of Iran in the future. So they are sending a signal to the Iranian people: we want regime change. We are clearing the path. And at some point, it's going to be safe for you to take to the streets. Now, at some point, I suspect there may be a formal announcement by the Trump administration and from the Israeli administration, the Netanyahu administration, to call to the people to storm the streets. And I very much believe, based on all the analysis I've done and the assessment of the damage that we have so far, that this regime will not be able to withstand the attacks from the US, from Israel, the pressure that's building throughout the Middle East for regime change, and ultimately the groundswell of pressure that's going to come from the Iranian people themselves. I'm confident that this regime is going down. The timing question is more difficult to answer. When will it fall? When will it fall? What the new regime will look like, hard to know. But I am pretty confident that the day is coming that this regime is going down. So let's take a pause and see if anyone has any comments or questions.